You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
Welcome back to the show for the pros. It's the 21.5 podcast, hosted by a couple of pros.
Episode 72.
My name is Dylan. I am a professional pilot in business aviation, flying a Challenger 604 all around the great United States.
I'm Max. I'm a professional pilot in airlines and business aviation.
Lots to talk about today, Max. You were traipsing around Europe on your honeymoon, so we had to delay a little bit, but we're excited to bring you an episode with all sorts of good stuff. We had some flight advice. We brought in Diamond Dog James to assist in some career advice.
I love how none of the Diamond Dogs actually know what the Diamond Dogs are.
No one knows what it is.
Except for you and me.
So we gave some good career advice, and then we just talked about all of the job fairs, all the craziness. I know you and I have a friend that's a recruiter for one of the majors, and they were just telling us some of the stories of what's going on at these job fairs now, and it's insane. So James gives us a great update there on what's going on and how to be prepared for the next one that's coming up. And then a great conversation with Everett Capano on the future of Part 91 management and how you can make your operation run a little bit smoother, just outsourcing some of the stuff that maybe you and your pilots don't want to do, which I think is key right now.
And get in the way of your stuff you should be doing and focusing on.
Absolutely. A key for retention in these uncertain days. Let's start off, Max, with some donations. Big news. We got a very generous donation from our friend Rick, who is a big fan of the show. And he sent us an email and said, Dylan and Max, I truly enjoy your podcast and think they are a value to our industry. As an older guy, you have opened my eyes to the generational differences and changes in the workforce. I've really enjoyed your guests. You make me look back at my time in aviation and value every moment. Although I am approaching 50 years as a professional pilot, I still see myself as an 18-year-old CFI or the 26-year-old DC-3 captain. Shout out McDonnell Douglas. Your most recent podcast was terrific. It is critical to understand that our profession is more than flying, etc. Over the years, I have seen stress on relationships and families have been torn apart from it. As we come up on the industry, we rarely have been taught, in addition to advancing in our career, that we have to take ourselves and our loved ones. Your guests hit the mark. It will sound a bit stupid, but this podcast should be that which you are most proud. Being a proficient, successful pilot does not automatically make one a successful person. The message I give to pilot friends who are entering a relationship, if you found the right one, do not F it up. Work as hard at your relationship as you have on your career. Take care. Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah.
Kind words.
He's referencing our previous episode, the 3-hour juggernaut that we put out regarding aviation, relationships, raising families. More of that coming in the mailbag. So Rick made a very generous donation, and you can also make a generous donation to the show by visiting 215podcast.com. Scroll to the bottom, and there's a donate button. And big news, Max, would you like to tell the folks what would happen if they make a donation?
We have more merch, more swag that Dylan and I personally designed, as usual, executed. These are hats. These are 21.5 branded hats, and they're actually really cool. With a minimum donation of $55, we will be happy to send you one of these really cool hats. I realize that is expensive for a hat, but one, they are very cool, and two, they cost a significant amount to us.
Essentially, you get a hat and you're making a $20 donation.
So
these are awesome. This is a hat I love to wear. We're going to have some pictures on the socials, but it's by a company called Branded Bills, which they make awesome hats here in Arizona. They got this cool leather patch, flex fit trucker hat. My favorite style. I think you're really going to like them. Gray and black is the color.
Yeah, it's really cool. Dylan wearing it as
I'm wearing it right now. It's so comfortable. Perfect for podcasting. Anyways, thanks so much. Rick, you're going to get our first hat. We're going to ship that off to you.
Great Aviation Podcast, a truly informative and interesting podcast. They cover all aspects of aviation, which is particularly helpful for the younger pilots. They're also willing to take suggestions for new show ideas from their listeners. Very interactive. The sessions with Raven Careers are especially great. Oh, we have a James Lover.
Good news for you, James Lover. We've got more James in this episode.
Yeah.
That's from KPS 298806. shoot us an email and with your mailing address, and I'll send you some stickers for writing that great review. Thank you very much. Coming up, the mailbag, brought to you by our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy. What's the latest from Advanced Aircrew Academy these days, Max?
Dylan, we've talked about this before, and I'm going to ask you one time. What continues to be the number one incident type in business aviation?
Screwing up the rental car for the boss at the destination.
Yeah, that's got to be up there. So this is taken from the Advanced Aircrew Academy's blog, and the number one incident type in business aviation continues to be the runway excursion, with 34 excursions in the United States in 2021. We just talked about this. The more data
turboprop jet thing
continue to live up. Yeah, 35% increase over 2020. And again, light jets continue to lead the pack. So what can you do about that? Well, the Global Action Plan for Prevention of Runway Excursions included 101 recommendations organized by a group for airport operators and everybody, and pilots and everybody else. The Aircrew Academy developed a checklist to put this in a more usable format. And if you're interested in that, email them at info@aircrewacademy.com to request a copy of the spreadsheet. They are the best at providing online training in our space. So if you're a department manager, chief pilot, DO, anybody that needs to provide a flight department with online training, please turn to Aircrew Academy, aircrewacademy.com.
All right. Letter number 1. Guys, greatly appreciate that podcast. Now time to drag my wife to listen to all of it. I'm sure that's exactly the type of podcast you guys truly enjoyed. I'm actually a Coast Guard helicopter pilot who owes a few more years of service. The last segment was particularly perfect for me, and that's from listener Kevin, and he's referring to the previous episode. The last segment was particularly helpful for folks that are in the military looking to transition to the airlines. We talked to the wife of a Navy pilot, and she described the similarities, the differences, strategies, things they'd learned. So glad to hear folks are getting some value out of that one. Next email, Max.
Thank you so much for all the fantastic content. You guys are awesome. Currently listening to episode 71 and love the great discussions. I'm a corporate jet pilot for a high net worth individual, but have flown for both regional as well as wide body cargo under Part 121 for several years. For me personally, corporate aviation provides a far better quality of life than the airlines ever could. Perhaps I'm the exception to the rule, but just wanted to throw it out there that corporate aviation can be a wonderful career as well. My wife has been able to stay at home for the last 8 years. I am home 3+ weeks at a time. Salary and benefits are more than adequate. Schedules are known weeks ahead. And I always have the option to turn down a flight and get a contract pilot if I have something else scheduled. Much of my experience in corporate aviation has been negotiated. Having the ability to know what you want or need and being able to articulate that to your principal is a very valuable skill. I think a big difference between that and the airlines is that many of those things are negotiated beforehand with the company on your behalf. Just some thoughts to balance the discussion. Thanks again for all you guys do. It is both appreciated and needed. Chris.
That's a great point. I would like to somehow negotiate that I could get a contract pilot every time I had something else to do when a trip pops up. You're going to have to tell us how you work that one out, Chris.
Well, I think with the point, too, is that in business aviation, there's a lot of variability from one job to the next. And Chris sounds like he's found a good one. And the other thing, too, that I think makes a big difference, that sounds like Chris is one of his strong suits, is the ability to negotiate. Just some people are just not as good of negotiators as others, which if you're the latter, having the union do it for you is very attractive and probably the best thing for your career. And if you are a good negotiator and you provide a lot of value to the principal and you can leverage that to negotiate some great compensation and employment terms, sounds like Chris has, then it can be a great thing. So yeah, corporate aviation is a great business. That's why I still find myself not able to tear away from it completely. And I probably had the experience and the opportunity to go fly for the airlines sooner than I did, but I do not regret it for a second because of the experiences and the stuff that corporate aviation afforded me the ability to do was awesome. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I agree. We talk about some of the characteristics of successful pilots in business aviation, right? Lots of soft skills, being personal with people, being able to form relationships with your passengers, and that negotiation skill is also
and networking with other,
and networking,
because so much of your success in obtaining a new job in business aviation is networking. So
all great personality traits for business aviation pilots. All right, next email. In episode 69, you are correct that no one memorizes the DMMS for each flap setting. but I use AOA on all approaches. Remember, the DMMS was the minimum flap maneuvering speed, and we talked about that in regards to the latest Learjet crash in San Diego.
And if you don't know what those are, that's the minimum speed you can fly before you need to extend more flaps.
So he says, I use AOA on all of my approaches. If you don't go below 0.6, you will never have a problem. It doesn't matter on your weight or your configuration. It is also a great check on your calculation for approach speed. If you get the weight wrong, you could have the incorrect speed bugged, but at 0.6, you will always be on speed. If you are flying the calculated approach speed and the AOA is 0.6, then you calculated it correctly. Just a simple suggestion for a quick double check. And that's from Michael.
Couldn't agree more with Michael, assuming you have an AOA indication in the car.
That's the problem,
That's
Michael.
the caveat, right? Did you ever take that aerodynamics class or flight performance? I don't know, whatever class in college. And I remember the first day, the guy said, we fly airplanes on airspeed, which is completely wrong. And I remember being like, what? And led into the discussion of AOA, and everything is AOA. That the speeds change to maintain a certain angle of attack and yada, yada. So AOA should be king, I think.
Here's the problem. One, we don't train it. Now, two, there's more JA airplanes are getting AOA, which is good because I think we can start focusing that on more on the primary. But like most business aircraft don't have it. Older legacy ones don't have it. The Beach Jet, which you and I both flew.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. The G3 had that same one, like the little dial one.
Yeah.
And it had an indexer up. And
we don't have any of that in the Challenger. It's so annoying.
But it's interesting. Like the 737, the NG does not have an AOA indication. The Max now does.
It just seems like such common sense. And I think it's frustrating if you read some other things. A lot of systems use the AOA and they actually do get the AOA, like the stall and everything, but then they just don't happen to have an instrument. It's just like, this is so stupid. I remember, like I was saying in the Beach Jet, it was awesome. Exactly what he's saying. You can use the AOA and cross-check your weight and do everything. And I would climb the airplane. In the Beach Jet, you could climb it. I think it was at 0.1 AOA. It's like the most efficient climb. And it was awesome. But it's a shame that more airplanes don't have it because I totally agree with you, especially, like, you know what? You should tell the story you told me about one of the first times when you flew the G3, and because the weight can vary so much in that airplane because of the fuel. Didn't you have like a big, like, eye-opening experience in the pattern one time with that?
No, I just remember when I first started flying it that we would be dragging a lot of fuel places and do a max landing weight because to save money, because the gas was cheap somewhere. And I just remember the airplane flew markedly different depending on your landing weight. It was just eye-opening coming from smaller airplanes, I think, was really the thing. But another interesting representation of AOA that you don't really get unless you fly smaller planes with newer avionics is this audible AOA, which is so cool. You know, the whole base to final spin scenario deal where people stall. The newer airplanes, they have an audible tone. And as you get closer to the critical angle of attack, it beeps faster. You know, it goes beep, 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 beep. And then it's a solid tone when you hit the critical angle of attack when you stall. So even if you're looking outside and you're loading the airplane up or whatever, you get that beep without even looking at anything. And that it's like an immediate reaction. If it sneaks up on you, you immediately like release back pressure. You're like, oh my God, you know.
I've never flown an airplane with that.
My airplane has that. The Moose.
Oh, that airplane.
I'm talking like G3, like Garmin, like little airplane stuff. But cool. It's a really, really cool indication. We learned to look for the cues of a stall is this audible tone that comes way earlier.
It's kind of like when you're backing your car up and it's got the backup sensors.
Yeah. Have you ever done that? Except for it came on and you weren't expecting it. It's basically the same reaction.
When I just hammered the trash can the other day when I was pulling my truck out of the driveway. Yes, I've done that. Thanks for all the great emails to everyone that wrote in to the mailbag. If you have something you'd like to let us know, it's info@215podcast.com. Shoot us an email. We'll be happy to read your thoughts on the air. Thanks to everyone who wrote in. Coming up, some flight advice brought to you by our friends at Harvey Watt. You all know who Harvey Watt is, of course. If you've been listening to this show for any length of time, you know. They are the premier provider of loss of medical insurance for professional pilots around the globe. Over 70,000 professional pilots at the airlines, cargo, corporate, charter, and everywhere in between trust Harvey Watt to protect themselves and their families if they lose their medical certificate. It's tough to earn a buck in the air without that thing. Visit harveywatt.com for more information and to see all of the coverages available for professional pilots.
Work that into your next comp plan if you're a corporate pilot.
Boom. Or hire Chris to do it for you.
To do it for you. Yeah, he didn't mention that in his email. I wonder if he has.
Yeah, Chris.
There's some room for improvement here.
Yeah. It's 2022, new challenge. All right. I guess it's time to call James. Here we go. Oh, you know what that sound is, Max.
And now, the legend, the man, James Onieal, Raven Careers. Welcome to the show, James.
So James is joining us with the Harvey Watt Diamond Dogs flight advice segment. We've had listeners write in seeking some wisdom from the Diamond Dogs here. This one says, hello, I work for a Part 135 operator that has an internal recurrent program. Our sim instructors are line pilots. They teach and fly. I find out that you do not have to be a captain to be a sim instructor. I enjoyed my time as a CFI, and I think I would enjoy being a sim instructor. I actually want to be a sim instructor at some point in my career. I am 2 years from captain upgrade, and becoming a sim instructor might delay the upgrade a bit. I would be flying the line less and need flight time in type to meet the upgrade requirements. I am also considering applying to a major airline and don't need any more flight time to meet their requirements. Sim instructor might look favorably on the resume. Additionally, I think the experience in the sim might make me a better captain when the time comes. What would you do? Focus solely on the captain upgrade or possibly delay upgrade and diversify the resume?
This is actually a really fascinating question that we bump into a lot. In this case, we're talking about becoming a sim instructor, but sometimes people look on getting on recruiting teams. They look on getting union involvement. They want to go into an assistant chief pilot position, right? There's a lot of outside cockpit positions that are on the table right now. If you're one of those pilots that is passionate about flying, but really gets that deep level of joy of getting involved, doing other things other than just manipulating flight controls, then it becomes a hard choice because you can step out and become a sim instructor. You can step out and become an assistant chief pilot. But the problem is it could delay you getting to wherever your end target is, in this case, a major airline. So here's the deal. The first is if you already meet the qualifications of wherever it is you want to go, right? And that's going to be different because if you want to go to, let's say, a FedEx, right, versus, let's say, United, they're going to have different PIC requirements, different total time requirements, so on and so forth. But if you meet the requirements of where you want to go, total time, PIC time, so on and so forth, and you are still going to be able to fly whatever their minimum threshold is per year outside the cockpit position. So let's say you become a sim instructor, but you still log 200 hours a year, then there's really not a lot of negative consequence to taking that outside the cockpit job. And in this case, we'll use sim instructor, right? It's probably going to make this person a better pilot. It's probably going to make them a better captain. It's probably going to make them a better instructor. It's probably going to give them a better understanding of candidate selection. So when they go into interview, they have a better idea on how to present themselves. So there's certainly a lot of tangible and intangible pros to taking that position. But if they do not meet the qualifications of the company that they want to go to, or they just barely meet those qualifications, then pulling themselves out of the cockpit too early could be damaging to their career. It could lengthen out the amount of time that they have to sit as a first officer. It could lengthen the amount of time they have to stay at their current operator. It could reduce their salary by significant amounts. It could reduce their retirement by significant amounts. So this is obviously going to be somewhat of an individual decision, but you just need to weigh out those consequences of what is the benefit versus what is the cost. If ultimately you really don't think it's going to lengthen out your time to get to where you want to go do it. Enjoy every second of it. If you do think it's going to delay your time getting where you want to go, then just delay taking that sim instructor, that's assistant chief pilot position, just a little bit until you have a little bit more experience and then jump into it. Because there does become a point where getting more flight time is not actually doing anything for you.
Right. So I think also there's probably a scenario where if you become a sim instructor, you're getting this great outside the cockpit experience, you're able to stand out on your resume, you might get to the major faster than upgrading, right?
The other thing is why not take a look at a position at United as a fleet technical instructor? We have a number of folks that have done that. You go and you become a sim instructor, I think it's like 2 years, and then you move into the right seat. JetBlue has a very similar program to that. So if you want to go to that major and you want to go work in that type of environment and make that money, you can potentially go into one of those sim instructor positions and take little to no consequence to your career development and your pay and so on and so forth. So the other thing is don't forget to be creative. If you really want to be a sim instructor, go take a look at United, go take a look at Delta, go take a look at JetBlue and look at their programs. Some companies, when you become a sim instructor, they have a hard wall in between sim instructors and line pilots, meaning sim instructor is not a good way to become a line pilot. United and JetBlue are the opposite. Those are great ways to become line pilots at those companies. They very much have a, hey, come on in the side door here as a sim instructor, and we'll move you into a flying slot.
Does your seniority start when you come on property as a sim instructor?
That is a great question. I will be honest. There's been some changes to some of these programs recently, and so I don't want to speak out of turn. Every time someone calls and asks that question, I reach out to someone directly at the companies and go, hey, look, as of this week, what's the policy? I don't want to give someone bad advice. And the determining factor is really, when you're a sim instructor, is it a unionized position or not a unionized position? Is it the same union that covers the pilots or not the same union? That's really what creates that friction. If it's a separate unionized group, that's why they create a wall where you don't get to jump over. But if you come into that sim instructor position basically on the pilot seniority list, then you have a seniority number and so on and so forth.
James brings up a really good point where you kind of kill two birds with one stone and scratch the sim instructor itch as well as maybe transition right to the major airline position. So
if you want to talk about what's going to make you a better captain at the airline you want to work for, be a sim instructor at that airline and watch the people you're running, because you're going to be running captains and first officers through. Don't underestimate the networking and learning opportunities you get by teaching those people. I'll use on the corporate side, right? You go to a flight safety and you have a sim instructor, a ground instructor who's great. They're pulling just as much from the students about how does the airplane actually work out online? How does this break? How does that break? What are your policies? What are your procedures? How do you handle this? They're pulling just as much from the students as they're giving to the students. I would never challenge a flight safety instructor to who can explain the electrical system of the airplane better. They're going to be able to beat me 10 out of 10 times. But when it comes to how does the thing break out online, there's some value I can bring there. And so that's how I think about those sim instructor relationships, those management pilot relationships. If you're really doing it for the right reasons, you are going to take as much as you're going to give. And that's a really cool experience to be a part of, in my opinion.
With some of these folks that we're hearing about getting hired as FOs, never making a captain at a regional or a 135 and going right to a major, and they've never been a captain, that's, I think, crazy to me, because you go there and then maybe someday you're going to upgrade to captain at a mainline and you've never been a captain before. That's going to be really hard. So I think either getting that sim instructor experience or that captain experience at the lower level will prep you for later on, because I can't imagine trying to be like I'm 35 or 40 years old. Now I'm finally going to be captain for the first time. I don't know.
I want to preface this with, I do not know the gentleman personally. I've never met him or spoken to him. But Delta just awarded an upgrade on the 7-3 to someone that was hired in November. So November, December, January, was that 3-4 months ago? And if you go on the internet, there's a whole bunch of memes that are pretty brutal towards that guy right now. So if you're bored, you can go look those up. But, you know, it spurred a conversation that I was having with a couple of the advisors on staff. You know, people think, hey, when you become a captain, you're a captain. That automatically means that your crew's going to respect you. And it just isn't true. There are a lot of subtleties to being a leader where you can kind of earn trust, earn respect, earn rapport from your crew very quickly, right? Because, you know, you're swapping in and out. And so having some of those outside the cockpit positions really teaches a lot of those soft skills, because I promise, and maybe it's just me because I look goofy, but every time I get in the cockpit with someone new, you have to prove to them that you're worthy of being followed. And that's a lot of subtle things. When you meet someone, do you let them talk about themselves first? Do you ask, hey, do you want to fly the first leg or not? What hotel brand do you like? Where do you like going to dinner, right? There's subtle things you can do that you learn how to show respect and consideration to other people, and they end up giving that in return. But you get in the cockpit and go, hey, I'm the captain, I'm in charge. Oh, okay. Well, that other person has a lot of different ways that can mess your day up. And you'll learn all those ways really, really quickly. Those sim instructor positions, like I said, you learn a lot of those soft skills. And you learn a lot of different leadership styles from watching a lot of different people. And sometimes you learn the most from the people that are horrible at it. You learn what not to do. But that front row seat to watching how other people do things it's eye-opening.
Agreed. All right. Well, thanks for writing in. If you want some advice from Max and myself and any Diamond Dogs we can pull in, it's you can send us an email, info@215podcast.com, or visit the website and fill out the anonymous form. We'll be happy to tackle your problems. And if you wrote in that email about being a sim instructor, let us know in a few months what you decide. Be curious to see how it goes. Keep us posted. All right. Coming up next, James, well, we got you on the phone and figured we might as well find out what you've been up to lately. I heard you were out on the road meeting that you're a man of the people. You were meeting those
It's
on a road show.
on a road show.
Yeah. What's been going on? What are you seeing out there?
It's insane right now. I'll be honest. American was offering conditional job offers on the spot at NGPA,
For anyone that doesn't know, what's NGPA? What are you talking about?
National Gay Pilots Association.
They had a convention, right?
Convention, that's correct. And Women in Aviation is coming up here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So it's convention season. So that's been crazy. We do our live client updates last Wednesday of every month at 8 p.m. We get everyone together. We talk about networking and interview prep and a whole bunch of different back end stuff that we don't share publicly, tips, tricks, techniques. And one guy got a call from Southwest for the virtual interview and said, they said, can you interview in the next 2 hours? He said no. So they sent him dates and the dates went out one day. And they said, if this doesn't work, give us a call back. So I don't know. That's what we've been up to.
I feel like it's like this big herd of buffalo and we're all running towards the cliff,
We're pilots, right? So if everything gets too good, we start to get nervous that something bad's going to happen. And especially if you're in your 30s and 40s, you're 100% concerned right now because you're like, oh, the last time this was this good, my career dumped off a cliff, declared bankruptcy, got divorced and whatever. It's complicated for people because the speed with which they are getting conditional job offers and having to make decisions is fast. And the funny thing is people think, like I get this question all the time, like, with all the hiring right now, it's going to be really, really hard on business. No, because they're still rejecting people. I mean, they are 100%. It's not a free ride when you walk in there. You still have to earn your way in. And so we are spending a lot of time with people, making sure that they have structured introductions. They understand what a strong tell me about a time is and a weak tell me about a time is. And how do you answer, why do you want to work here? And how do you go through scenario-based questions and so on and so forth. But I'll be honest, the people that are successful are the ones that are preparing in advance. Those are the guys that are calling up and going, I have an offer at United, Delta, and Southwest. Which one do I choose? But the folks that are thinking ahead are getting multiple offers. And the people that aren't are going in and winging in interviews, tanking in them, and then coming back and then saying, hey, I need to get prepared. But it is craziness. I mean, conditional job offers on the spot, Southwest helping do application reviews at NGPA, clients getting interviews where they didn't even apply to the legacy. They were told on the spot, hey, apply. And then 2 days later, they have an interview.
So I've been seeing a ton of posts, especially on LinkedIn, for American recently. It seems like American is really kicked into gear. I've told a couple people this. I know Max and I were talking about this. If you just looked at the seniority numbers and the movements and retirement and everything, setting everything else aside, wouldn't it say that American would be the smart move?
That's always a fun question, right? Because with American, what people look at is how quickly your seniority number is going to go up. And then when they're panicking, talking about the debt position. Got to remember, there was only one legacy airline that furloughed during coronavirus, actually let people go off property. When folks take a look at American, the pros are the seniority jump. The cons are, hey, what's the financial position of the company? If anybody really knew long-term, they'd be a bazillionaire right now. A lot of times when we take a look at what's driving the decision for people, it's do they want to fly wide body international or not? The basing for the commuting, right? Because if you don't have to commute, why would you do that? And then lastly, if you want to be a captain, how quickly are you going to get to be one, either on a narrow body or a wide body? And that's really what's honestly driving the decision. If you live in Denver and you don't want to commute, it's kind of a hard sell for American. You live in Salt Lake City and you don't want to commute, it's kind of a hard sell for anybody but Delta. And so the decisions that people are making are far more practical.
I remember back in a different climate where people would just be like, I have to take the first opportunity I get, and then I'm going to have to build my life around that. And now that's sort of kind of changed, at least for the current climate, which is why it makes Max and I nervous right now.
Yeah. And the funny thing is it's created anxiety for people in a very different direction. This is the way I kind of think about it. Everyone thinks that more options is better until you go into a Home Depot and you say you want to repaint your house and you want to repaint the walls blue, and they give you 7,600 different colors of blue. And what you really wanted was like 3 really good blue options, not 7,600. Most people have not thought through, what would I do if United, Delta, and American offered me a job? There is a fear that kicks in for people that it is arrogant to think that through, right? That kind of like, if I get too far ahead of myself and I start thinking what happened if I got 3 legacy airline job offers, I'm getting full of myself. Like, don't do that. Don't put the cart before the horse. But the reality is, I'm not saying you should walk around and act like you have 3 conditional job offers from legacy airlines, but any airline or any company, corporate or otherwise, that you have an application in with right now, you need to seriously consider if every one of those called you within 2 weeks and offered you a job, which one would you take? And it's not arrogant to think it. It's not silly to think that through. It's not stupid. It's kind to your family, because you're probably going to get multiple conditional job offers if you're doing the things that we're telling you to do. And when that happens, if you don't have your mind wrapped around the concept of what that would look like, it's going to throw your family into a pretty high degree of panic. And when I say, if you do the things we do, you're likely going to get those. We really have 2 scenarios. People get multiple conditional job offers at the same time, or they get a conditional job offer, they go to class at a company, and then 2 months later, they get multiple conditional job offers. They're going to get, if they're working with us, they're going to get multiple. The question is, when are they going to get those multiple? I can't tell you how many people are calling us up in ground school at company X and going, I got an interview at company Y, and that's really where I want to be.
Can you explain to everybody exactly what a conditional job offer is? Because I think there's a lot of misconception about what that piece of paper actually means.
Sure. So if anyone's seen Dumb and Dumber, that scene with the IOUs in the briefcase, that's what a conditional
That's a great analogy.
That's a big one. You might want to hold on to that, right? That's what a conditional. Okay. So the word you got to focus on in CJO, conditional job offer, is conditional.
On everything.
Yeah. And it's conditional on a couple different things. So it's conditional on a background check, and it's conditional on you passing training. We've had 2 clients in the past month that made it through the entire interview process at Delta and then got a call back and had this conditional airline and ask them how they're liking life right now.
Because I'm sure they're on LinkedIn right now, just looking to talk to strangers.
Yeah. So background checks are just taking a really long period of time. And what that means is, if you did not take the time to background check yourself ahead of time, which is what we advise people to do, order copies of your FAA Airman file, call up your insurance company. Trust me, your state driving record won't always have all your tickets, but your insurance company will, because they can charge you more for it. So you take a look at, hey, every place that I've ever had a driver's license, pull a driving record. Every place you've ever lived, pull a criminal record for the state, do an FBI background check, right? There are a lot of different things where you can start pulling your own records, because there's stuff people forget. Go through your logbook, the last pages, look at every single date you got to sign off, go find that date in the actual logbook and find out, was there 1 or 2 signatures from the FAA examiner? If there's 2, you probably failed something. Go through and start looking through your own records and pulling this stuff, because if they find it on a background check and you didn't think this through and you didn't disclose it, you're not going to get away with, man, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. So conditional job offer is just that. It's conditional, and it's typically conditional on, at the very least, a background check and training being passed. If you did not hit certain thresholds or there were certain red flags in certain areas, it'll be conditional on a pilot review board. But it's not fun to get pulled out of ground school and find out, hey, man, you didn't tell us about this.
Yeah, that could be embarrassing.
Financially lucrative for us. So, I mean, I'm giving you advice here. It's my business.
So, James, we've got, you mentioned the conference season right now. Women in Aviation is coming up here in a few weeks, mid-March in Nashville. You said at NGPA, people were getting conditional job offers there, invitations to interview quickly. What advice do you have to anyone that's going to the Women in Aviation conference? How can they prepare, besides their thoughts of, printing out their resumes and getting all their suit and tie pressed? Like, what else should people be thinking about?
Here's the secret about job fairs. Most everybody non-revs to a job fair, right? Which means the first and last day of the job fair, everybody and their mother is trying to get out because the load factors are all screwed up, because the day before the conference, everyone's trying to come in and nobody wants to wait till the last day because everybody's going to be trying to get out. So at the last day of the conference, between 10 a.m. and noon, you can walk around and talk to anybody you want to, because there's nobody there other than the recruiters. And every conference, we tell our clients, if you're going to pick one day, pick the last day, because it's going to be empty. We had a guy, NGPA, took the advice. He goes, on the last day, he goes, I'm walking around the conference, and I go up to the Southwest table, and there's nobody there. He goes, so I start talking to the recruiter, and she's got these chargers, and he goes, hey, those chargers are pretty neat. Can I get one? She goes, yeah, they're really neat. I don't know why more people didn't take them today. You want like 3 of them? He grabs like 3 chargers. While he's there, one of the other pilot recruiters comes over and goes, hey, man, what's your name? And he goes and has a nice 20, 30-minute conversation. He's the guy that got the call that said, can you interview in 2 hours? He went to NGPA, did everything we told him networking-wise, followed it to a T. A week later, he gets a phone call that says, what are you doing in the next 2 hours? Or tomorrow, if you need time to prepare. Now, he had already done the interview prep. He had already had his resume done. He had already had the application reviewed. He had already done the background check stuff that we told him to do. He had already talked to us about all the background check stuff that popped up to make sure it was okay. He was ready for the opportunity.
He goes, I'm still at the conference.
He goes, I'll see your 2 hours. How about right now? I'm ready.
Since I got you on the phone, let's go.
Yeah, so that's it. Just three-way in whoever we need to. Let's knock this out.
Yeah, exactly. These opportunities, they're not going to come your way like a slow rowboat. They're going to come zooming on by like a NASCAR race car. And if you're not ready for it, ready to move at the exact moment and moving at the speed you need to, that opportunity is going to whiz right on by you. And so what we're doing is getting our people mentally prepared. That's what we're doing during the resume. That's what we're doing during the application. That's what we're doing during these monthly client meetings is we're getting them familiar with their background. What is important? What is not important? What are they focusing on? What are the questions they're asking right now? Who's getting hired? Who's not getting hired? Why are they getting hired? Why are they not? You need to be in the right mental space so that when that opportunity comes, you're ready to hit. Because otherwise, it's going to be, what was the license plate of that freight train that just hit me? And they're going to move on. They don't care.
That is great advice. And I'll tell you, even on the business aviation side, I have noticed the same thing. Those slow building, this job and this is long. That's never this way it seems to work out. It's like these opportunities present themselves and it's like, boom, make a decision.
Can you kind of give me the philosophy here of the airlines and people that are attending these conventions to then, is it a way to cut in line to get an interview? And like, what's the benefit to the airline? Can you just explain the mentality of the whole thing?
It's the difference between buying a car on the internet and going to the dealership. You have an opportunity to see someone face to face, see how they present, talk to them, right? Get a feel for who they are and make a decision on the spot. This is a person I want to talk to. Or ruffle through thousands of sheets of paper. What would you rather do?
James, we'll get you out of here on this last question. Flow through programs. Saw GoJet just announced one with United. To me, I read that I'm like, well, whoop-de-doo. I don't need a flow through program. I'm going to get a call wherever I'm at. I mean, how much stock should people be paying attention to this? Is this just sort of fluff? What do you think?
This is typical bubble behavior. Any type of situation where you have a supply issue, take a look at housing in the early 2000s. What happens is things get out of control because pilots are taking whatever job that comes their way. They're getting multiple offers from multiple legacies, so they're leaving one legacy for another in the middle of training. And that creates panic for HR because they're not used to that. Think about being a United, Delta, or American recruiter. You're not used to having to convince someone that you should actually come work for me. You're United, you're Delta, you're American. You're used to people waiting in line to talk to you. And so what they're doing is trying to stabilize the situation. There's probably going to be something like between 9,000 and 10,000 pilots hired when it's all said and done. Remember, every month you don't get hired by your legacy airline is 200 seniority numbers down you are. So they're trying to create stability because they're losing their regional pilots and they're running out of people that are qualified to hold captain. So what they're trying to do is stabilize the situation. My argument right now is it's making the situation worse because if you're going to sell your car, right, and I come by and I go, hey, I'll offer you 20 grand for that. And 10 minutes later, Max comes by and goes, I'll offer you 22 grand for that. And then I come back and go 23 and Max goes 24. You're eventually going to go, well, I'm just going to hold out for the best offer. And now you start thinking this is going to keep going. It's going to keep going. It's going to keep going. It's going to keep going. So there is no logic behind the decision-making process. So they're saying originally it was bonuses for the regionals. Now it's this, hey, we've got a flow-through program. Okay, now you don't even need to interview. You just show up at the regional and now you're in our flow-through program. So now it's having a destabilizing effect where pilots are going, well, you know what? There's some better deal around the corner. And so it almost has zero impact on their decision-making. Just creates more panic and excitement and fast movement. And so I'm not really too hyped up about these flow-through programs. How'd that go for you at Eagle?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Max and I were both there at American Eagle long enough. I mean, they kept trotting out the flow-through. Oh, never mind. And then like it was just like this scarecrow they would bring out when they needed to. And it's just my advice to any pilot listening is like, too much can change in the airlines in several years, and whatever program is brought out can be changed at any time unilaterally, usually.
Yeah. So flow-through programs are like car insurance. Yes, I carry car insurance on my car, and no, I don't intentionally wrap it around a tree.
So many analogies today. So many parables. It's like it's unbelievable.
I mean, we all carry car insurance. I'm not going to intentionally drive my car into a tree. It's stupid, right? So yeah, okay, you want to give me a flow? Great. I'll hold on to it, but I'm not depending on it.
That's probably the sagest advice. If you're at a place where there's a flow, I wouldn't just kick back. Like you said, 50 pilots are getting hired in front of you every month.
No, if I get to a legacy airline through a flow-through program, something went horribly wrong. It did. By the way, you can tell who this has not been sponsored by. Where we see those conversations being meaningful, honestly, is when we're talking to high school students. When you talk to high school students, they're looking at it and they're like, okay, I can go to flight school and I can go straight there and then I go straight to United. And for them, right, if those flow-through programs actually work and it's like, hey, you get hired by a regional within 2 or 3 years, you're at a major, it's really a smart move for them. It really is. But if you're like 25 or 30 right now and you're depending on a flow-through program, dude, we're not that expensive for a resume, application review, and interview prep. You're going to save, what, $1,000, $2,000. It's going to cost you $400,000 in salary and probably $3 million in retirement. But hey, I guess you'd save $1,000 or $2,000.
All right. Well, James, if folks are going to Women in Aviation Conference, they're panicking, is there still time to call you guys and get a little bit of help and get their ducks in a row?
You can call us. You can probably get on my calendar towards the end of March, about a week or two after the conference is done. We are working with people that are thinking ahead. That's why our clients are getting multiple conditional job offers. If you're thinking like a week before, I'm going to go get ready, it's the NASCAR car is moving at 300 miles an hour and it's about 30 feet away from you. So you're trying to jump on and it just won't work. You got to start thinking ahead.
Is there another conference anytime in the year that...
Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals, OBOP, will be in August. Our tag will be in the fall. I want to say they're in like October. And if you subscribe to our weekly emails that come out every Tuesday, American has done a Meet the Chiefs, Frontier has done a Meet the Chiefs. We put the links in there to have people sign up for them. But you got to remember, if you're sitting at home right now thinking, man, should I start getting ready? 50 of your buddies have been getting ready for the past month, right? So take your time, think it over.
All right, James. Thanks as always for your incredible opinions, the metaphors and the parables. It's unbelievable. Ravencareers.com. We'll have all your contact info in the show notes if someone wants to get on your calendar. Sounds like in early summer, there's some availability. So, all right, we will catch up with you again here in a couple months.
For the folks that do actually want to reach out, though, go to ravencareers.com. They get a link right to my calendar, and they will be able to see what the availability is. It does fluctuate, but they'll be able to see the availability. But right now, you're talking between 2 weeks and a month is what you want to lead it by.
All right, James. Great as always. Appreciate it.
Good stuff. Thanks, James.
All right.
Ground guard.
This conversation we had with Neil Everett Capano, I think is really interesting. He approached us and said, hey, let's talk a little bit about management, what's going on in the business aviation space right now, management companies, and they're all over the board. Some of them are turning away clients. Some of them are trying to focus more on charter right now because that's where the hotspot is. And I think you and I have both worked for management companies and we've experienced what it's like to be in that kind of weird dance where you are working for the owner, but also the management company. And how does that exactly work? And we've experienced some of the benefits of having a lot of the support that sometimes a Part 91 operator doesn't have on their own. And so Neil's kind of pitching a hybrid where you can still get some support, but maybe you don't have to navigate some of that kind of weird relationship stuff. So I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too. One of those services that you didn't know existed, but a lot of people I think really need.
All right, let's do it. Aircraft management, one of our favorite topics, Max. A passion, small flight department management. Very excited to have Neil Everett Capano join us today, the founder of Yonderwest. You told me it's aircraft management light. Is that right?
Sure.
So, Neil, we've got a lot of questions for you today about aircraft management, what the future is, retaining talent. I think there's a lot to discuss today, but maybe just start off a little bit telling us about yourself, who you are, and how you started Yonderwest.
Sure. So I started out at the airlines. I came up through Independence Air, Comair, and Delta. That started my career back when I was about 18. So I was at the airlines for almost a decade. And then I got my dispatch license after working at a private FBO in New Hampshire. I bounced around the East and West Coast. I consider myself a little bit bicoastal. By that, I mean that it's a little bit of East Coast hustle, West Coast flow. So I started the business in January of 2018 after a year and a half stint at Gamma and Wheels Up. And I think that there was a bunch of considerations when I started the business, and they have so far have been pretty damn insightful. It's important for people to kind of understand the other ways that people can actually accommodate aircraft management and the infrastructure that's involved with it.
So like for those of our listeners, maybe that have just only come up through the airlines or whatever, a traditional aircraft management company, a lot of times we'll have a charter certificate component too. But let's just say if you're a 91 airplane and you're on a management company, they will provide the mechanism for you to get paid and have benefits. So the owner pays the management company, and then they take their cut and they pay your salary and they pay for your health insurance benefits, this and that. They usually have a director of maintenance that manages the maintenance of the airplane. The owner of the airplane traditionally will call the scheduling department of the management company. They'll put the schedule in, notify the pilot. So they're kind of like the middleman for basically everything. That's like a traditional aircraft management model, right?
Sure. So, I mean, everything that you would need to fly, right? Everything from procuring jet fuel to making sure that there's staffing and crew and there's someone meeting you at the other side, that there's insurance and all the different apparatus that you would need to operate an aircraft safely and within the FAA compliance. This is all something that is inherently part of the business model of aircraft management.
Okay, so that's the traditional aircraft management company. Tell us about what you do differently.
So we create a set of services that are almost supplemental to aircraft management. So Yonderwest provides a couple of different lines of business, everything from tip to tail, aircraft strategy, looking 5 years out, figuring out what's next. You know, after the global, are you getting a G650? You know, what does that look like? What does taxes look like? What is the financial implications of that? How is your mission going to change? To simply day-to-day nuts and bolts of actually operating an aircraft, being that person at the other end of the phone that people call when they need to schedule their airplane, or, hey, listen, we have a meeting downtown Scottsdale. Are we going into Deer Valley or Sky Harbor or SDL? And then try to figure out where that is and help support the users of that aircraft, provide as the most amount of consistent service that they can with as little pain as humanly possible. Because in the grand scheme of things, I mean, aircraft management and Yonderwest differences aside, at the end of the day, people want to get to where they're going. They want to do it safely within the confines of the regulations and be able to be secure enough to know that what they're getting into in advance and knowing that there's going to be complete follow through at the end.
So are most of your clients coming to you? Is it a guy that comes to you and says, hey, I want to buy my own airplane, I just don't know how to get pilots and to do it all? Or is it mostly somebody that's managing a Part 91 flight department that's like, hey, I've been doing this for a couple of years and I'm drowning here. Like, I need some help. I'm trying to figure out which way they come at you, from the owner side or from the crew side.
It's both. And in fact, there's actually a third avenue as well. And case in point, we're recording this at the end of January. My phone started blowing up around this first week of January because people all of a sudden got an end of the year statement that just blew them out of the water. And it became a complete surprise to them. They're like, I didn't know that this was such a problem, that, my management company was taking this cut or that this was coming down the pike, because they didn't advise me. And then all of a sudden there's this sticker shock. So realistically, Yonderwest provides services in a manner that is much more cost effective than a traditional aircraft management model. And that is mostly because we don't have to invest in this massive set of infrastructure. We don't have to have those 15 schedulers sitting in an office. We don't have to have that massive director of maintenance and parts oversight rule. We don't have to have all of this stuff that is an ingrained part of aircraft management. We can kind of pick and choose and help people with the services that they actually request, rather than being forced into a scenario where an aircraft owner is forced to pay for a bunch of services they potentially don't want or need, depending on the situation.
Well, I think it's interesting because the traditional management company, the local rich guy in town who decides to buy an airplane, and that's the kind of the first step that he goes to, and maybe he goes to that traditional management company. They help him find a pilot. They help get the operation going. And then I think oftentimes what we see is once everything's established, a lot of the hard work for a management company is getting everything going. And then if they find the right person, right pilot and stuff like that, it's like the relationship changes at some point because a lot of the services that a management company provide maybe just aren't quite as necessary, especially if you have like competent crews in place. So Max and I have seen this all the time is, the strong lead captain. And then he's like, I can do it better than a management company. And then we're going to part ways. And sometimes that works out good for everybody. And sometimes that's a really bad idea.
Sometimes it very much does not.
And so I think it's like this evolution, but I think the needs of a flight department are constantly changing. So do you see that as well? Do you see kind of these departments that have they've gone from baby steps to now they're like in a different phase and they just need to supplement a couple of things? Is that
I'm seeing that, but there's also the fact that we don't live in a bubble. There's a ton of different ways that you could potentially manage an aircraft. Even if the outside observer, it's relatively slim, like the differences are slim. More than that, it's about having that adult in the room. And if that adult in the room, that chief pilot that extricated an aircraft owner or an aircraft from a management company and they've decided that they can do it better themselves, most of the time they can, but they typically are lacking a lot of that kind of intrinsic big picture view that typically is brought on by an executive assistant of an owner or a scheduler or a maintenance tech that's with the airplane all the time when it's not flying. So all of those little bits and pieces can sometimes get lost by the wayside. So Yonderwest is kind of here to help retain that information and maintain their own staffing and maintain all the necessary stuff that they need to be able to be consistently experts at what they do. I sometimes tell chief pilots, especially, I'm like, listen, I'm here to make you look like a rock star. I can be sitting here in Scottsdale with Max and Dylan, but I can also be sitting at my house in Washington or, at a club in Cabo San Lucas. And ultimately the customer experience is exactly the same. But you have that eyesight with the aircraft owner or with an executive assistant or whoever is the big boss at the end of the day. And, being able to be that rock star in their eyes is ultimately what you want. It's really what they want from you as well. It's just, you don't have to do it all yourself if there's opportunities where there's just things that a lot of pilots aren't that good at. If they need to jettison one part of this, then they can jettison it and they don't have to worry about it anymore. It's not that it's not going to get done. It's just that it's not going to get done by them and they can farm it out and then ultimately be more consistent, be able to have better time management, be able to arrange things in a manner that just kind of makes more sense for them rather than being forced into an arrangement like aircraft management.
So it's interesting. When I was managing this one airplane Gulfstream flight department, we were at a management company when I got hired. So it was always that kind of weird relationship as the flight department matured. And I was there for a while and formed a closer relationship with the owner. And I was like, obviously the thought in the back of my mind is we could do this and it would be a lot less complicated. But I didn't really want to make like the big grab to be like, hey, we don't need those guys. Like I just didn't think that was a prudent thing to do. But the owner came to realize it himself and we left the management company and we had a full-time mechanic and then just myself and the other pilot. And when we started that off, and I was also managing the hangar facility and the fuel farm. So we did that and we had the maintenance taken care of because we had our own full-time mechanic, right? So that's one facet of the operation. And then the rest of it we kind of figured out. But as we went and our flight operation became more complex with a lot like more international travel and just more going on. Like my problem I could see was that when I was responsible for too much outside of the scope of operating the airplane, my performance was in danger of suffering operating the airplane. And I'm a pilot and that's the primary job, right? Because then you can start infringing on safety and this and other thing. And I could see that kind of happening. I didn't know that this existed, what you're explaining currently. A lot of people don't. Right. One of the things that we do on this podcast is try and bring things to light that people don't realize exist. But I realized that I was kind of slowly sinking into this like, oh, the cars aren't here and they need to get here and, and all this nonsense.
Where are we staying?
Yeah, just all this. And so fortunately at the company, we had a lot of staff or we had good staff and we had like an office type assistant. And I sort of trained her to be our scheduler. Right. And I'm like, look, here's where we're going to draw the line. I'll get the airplane to where it needs to go and the people there. And then you pick up from there with the transportation because you're already booking their hotels and this, that, and you coordinate with the scheduling and this and that. And she'd call me like, here's where we need to go. What airport do you want to go to? And I'd tell her that. And then she'd put it in the schedule and we kind of figured out how to work together. But my point being, if I didn't have that inherent built-in support, I would have been in bad shape. Like I would have either wanted to hire somebody or whatever, and continue to hire full-time bodies gets pretty cost prohibitive, especially in a one airplane operation, right?
Yeah, and frequently it's not even necessary, right?
Yeah, right. This is exactly what I could have used did I not have the built-in stuff.
Come on back to the dark side. Matt.
Yeah, right.
It is your destiny.
Listen, I've always got a foot in on either side of the line, it seems like.
And tying onto that, Neil, I think, can you talk a little bit about the pilot persona, and especially for the chief pilot or the lead director of the department, they want to be the man in the eyes of the principal, I think, more often than not. And so,
And they should be.
right. And that's part of that built in, that confidence, that trust that's so important in that relationship that you have. Do you find that's a big struggle with clients to, like, for a chief pilot or a lead captain to kind of let go of that in the beginning? Do you have to persuade them? Can you talk a little bit about that and what you see?
I think that in general, if and when a chief pilot or a director of operations or whoever's kind of running the show, once they realize that they're starting to have issues that they can't control themselves, or that they simply just don't have time to control themselves, I think at that point they're looking at options. But unfortunately, those options are kind of few and far between, because you're really grandfathered into from a traditional mindset. It's like, well, we can give the aircraft to an aircraft management company. I can still get a paycheck. I can still, do all this stuff. But the alternative is success is something that we have to focus on every single day. It's not something that just kind of like lucks into place. And I think that more and more chief pilots are recognizing that. And case in point, you have more like big Fortune 40 directors of aviation that aren't even coming from the pilot ranks anymore. They're coming from the maintenance side of things. They're, a director of maintenance becomes the director of ops. So we're seeing more and more things like that happening. But being able to let go and being able to recognize, I don't want to even say frailty, but just being able to recognize that there are alternatives to being able to be that rock star in front of your owner is super important. And at this point, more and more people are recognizing that that future is not only created by them, like the future of Part 91 Aviation is absolutely dedicated, siloed, independent flight departments. It doesn't remain with the management companies, and it hasn't for years. But in order to do so, they need to have both the practical resources and the know-how to accomplish every single situation. If you're an aircraft management company, anybody who says that they've done it all is just flat out lying to you. I haven't done it all. You guys haven't done it all. If there's a situation that, like, I certainly have specialties, right? My specialties are Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, and Japan. From an international standpoint, sure, I can get an airplane to the UK, but I'm not going to know everything about the intricacies, whereas I'm super well versed and I have specialties, right? And being able to recognize where those frailties lie and being able to know when you need help is super important. And that's part of, conscious leadership.
Yeah. The reason people buy a private jet is for convenience, right? And so it doesn't matter if you land an approach to minimums in a snowstorm and you put the airplane down, you taxi it in, and you're the big hero, but then the transportation doesn't show up. You just interrupted that experience of convenience, which puts things at risk, I think. And so if you're trying to take it all on and you drop the airplane stuff right, but then you drop the ball, what do you think people remember? That you flew to minimums and landed in a snowstorm, or that the van wasn't there and they had to wait 30 minutes?
Well, it's about expectations.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that even, more than the actual results, people setting it or having an understanding of what that expectation is going to look like is almost more important than the actual trip itself. Because ultimately, like in the back of people's reptilian minds, they want to look at exactly what they're going to travel for. And quite frankly, a lot of that disconnect, if you're a chief pilot and you're intimately familiar with the supporting business for the aircraft and the needs of your principal and all the other stuff that goes along with being able to know someone really, really well, if you're an aircraft management company, you typically don't have any insight in that. You're completely shut off. All you are is a service provider. And there has to be a middle ground. Just being able to fly to, Zaragoza, Spain, and do a bunch of meetings, it's also important for that chief pilot to know where the meetings are. If something were to happen on the way to the airport, where's the closest hospital? All that stuff that may not be readily available, or it may not even be thought of by a standard executive assistant that doesn't do anything with aviation. It's being able to be ahead of that entire curve. I've been in situations where I'm printing out MapQuests to, this is the alternative route from the resort to the airport. This is the nearest hospital. This is the nearest U.S. consulate. This is all the other information. This is the route you would take, even if there are no street signs. Like, I'm going to give you everything you need to be successful, but ultimately it's up to that crew and that pilot to actually perform. And I think that's one thing that's super important. Like, my biggest client, their pilots are complete badasses. They're absolutely awesome. They require absolutely no hand-holding from me. I get them a trip sheet. I give them the inside details and what they really need to know to be successful. And they just run with it. They don't need any additional feedback or push from me, but they also know enough about what's going on to be able to recognize the value in focusing on what's important.
And I think another thing we need to make clear is that increasingly full service management companies that incorporate a charter certificate and everything, they're less and less interested in having Part 91 only clients because there's no revenue like there is taking a cut from the charter revenue, which is how it works if you're not familiar. So not only can that be too much, a lot of times people, Part 91, are having a hard time finding somewhere that they're wanted if they need a management company solution. So something in the middle, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, going back to the entire concept of deciding that you can do it better than the current arrangement, at the end of the day, I mean, whether a flight crew is getting a paycheck from a large aircraft management company or it's coming from directly from a holding company of your principal, ultimately it doesn't matter. You still have that same relationship. It's just that with that logo on your paycheck, you have that obligation to an aircraft management company, but they're not necessarily loyal to you. It's not a two-way street. Like, they can bring in someone else if they decide that you're getting too close to the principal. They decide that they need to make a change. They'll make a change. And it will have absolutely nothing to do with your performance or your personality or your capabilities. It'll have everything to do with what's the best business for them. And it's a little bit of a cutthroat industry. And, thankfully I come with a serrated knife.
Yeah, we've always said it's a very, very interesting relationship to manage between the lead pilot, the management company, and the owner of the airplane. It's this like crazy love triangle that is very dicey.
Okay, I want to play devil's advocate for a minute. So when you talk to a management company, a lot of the advantages they bring are economies of scale, right? Fuel purchasing, training. I think that's still relevant for some operators, right?
Not for anybody. You can be the biggest aircraft management company in the country, and that argument about economies of scale has flown out the window. I mean, fuel flew out the window in like 2004. I mean, at this point, the amount of fuel aggregation and competition amongst both the fuel vendors, the FBOs, the suppliers, and the data providers that are actually coalescing all that information for you. I mean, you have companies everywhere from, Jet Fuel X to, all the other companies that are aggregating all this data for you so you can make more intelligent decisions. They're actually providing a service that in theory an aircraft management company should. But that doesn't necessarily flow all the way through because the aircraft management companies can absolutely claim that they're getting preferential pricing. But any well-run flight organization could get the exact same level of pricing. They just don't use it with the same argument. They don't use it with the scalability argument because at the end of the day, that scalability doesn't translate to the end user. It doesn't translate to the owner or the chief pilot of a flight department that's actually run by an aircraft management company because they're talking about economies of scale based on their entire fleet. So they ultimately don't care whether it's actually passed down to the owner or not. I just don't believe that the argument that scale and that economies of scale is valid anymore. It hasn't been valid in decades, but they're still using that exact same.
Well, I mean, okay, I get the Jet Fuel X thing. I love it. I use it. It's a great data aggregator. But if my management company has negotiated a fleet price with a certain vendor, it could be true that they could be getting cheaper fuel. Potentially, right? Or training or something. I mean,
there's too much data in fuel, and especially with like CAA and stuff, like that's an economies of scale of everybody who's in the same bucket of being a Part 91 operator, But when you talk about a fleet insurance policy or CAE or flight safety training rates, I mean, stuff like that, is that somewhere or what do you see there?
I mean, in what world, if you're operating, say, a Gulfstream 5 and you have the apparatus built out from a corporate level to sustain and fund that aircraft, and you're an individually siloed flight department, in what world do you think that business isn't evolved enough that they can get their own fuel pricing and they can get their own insurance for exactly the same rates that they're being sold something by an aircraft management company? The economies of scale in and of itself aren't enough for someone to say, oh, we're going to go to an aircraft management company. They have to actually be able to exercise on that. And the apparatus of most companies that are operating these large corporate jets, they have an entire bureaucracy of their own. So why would you jettison that part of your operation to an aircraft management company that is also just its own set of new bureaucracy?
No, I get that. But the other thing too, that even if there is some sort of, say you could save some money on recurrent, right?
Okay.
The problem is that's not free. It's $5,000 a month to get that privilege of saving $5,000. It doesn't a lot of time pencil out.
It's also completely subjective, and it depends entirely on the mission profile and what your staffing requirements actually are. Case in point, I tend to be a little bit punchy and a little bit cheeky with some of my marketing, just simply because it's low-hanging fruit. I mean, come on. But at one point, I actually made hats that said aircraft management on the top, and I went on LinkedIn and I was like, hey, I'm going to sell these hats for $25, but you don't actually get a hat because you don't get anything for your aircraft management fee. You're just going to give me $25 and I'm just going to keep the hat myself.
When we think about some of the services that you provide kind of in an a la carte, is that the best way? How do you describe it? Kind of.
I mean, I consider it more shared services. A la carte probably works for, stuff that Greg and I do specifically, but I think of it more of a shared services model because it's not just me doing it. It's being able to have that flexibility to bring in those other parts of the industry to be able to provide the same level of service that they would expect from an aircraft management company at a fraction of the price. Still completely within the bounds of regulations and common practices and all the different stuff that you would typically need to prove that you're an effective and safe flight department. We can help you provide all that stuff because we can actually go out and bring in people depending on the situation. I can bring in a chief pilot for a Falcon or a chief pilot from a Gulfstream, and it's completely irrelevant to me at the end of the day. But being able to have that group to bring in to assist is super critical to a lot of these guys because they only know what they know.
Let's take a break from our conversation with Neil for a second. Max, we're talking to Neil about outsourcing expertise here. I think one of the greatest things that a pilot can do is outsource for some expertise on financial matters. Of course, we're talking about our friend and certified financial planner, Tim Pope, who's been helping professional pilots nationwide create and execute a smart financial strategy. Timothy P. Pope, your financial planning partner for all phases of your financial flight. Check the show notes for a link to book your free appointment with Tim. All right, let's get back to Neil.
All right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit to a very hot topic right now, which I think is pilot retention in business aviation. And obviously, we see a lot of people going to everywhere. People moving up, people flying big jets in business aviation are moving on to the airlines, all kinds of stuff. So from your standpoint, what kind of advice are you giving? What are you doing to help people with pilot retention?
We all have to rely on ourselves to make sure that we're being better employers to pilots. It's not just pilots, it's maintenance techs too. It's a big topic for right now. That staffing hit, that staffing drain, when someone does decide to jump the fence and go to the airlines or go to a different flight department or, get an account on cargo or whatever the case might be, a lot of that is simply they're getting tasked with a bunch of things that weren't in their job description originally. And it harkens a little bit back to our discussion about chief pilots where, it's just like it builds and builds and builds until it just becomes too much. But if you don't have that additional administrative resource, if you don't have that outlet for those pilots to be able to offload some of that stuff, then they're not focused on flying the plane. They're focused on all the other stuff that they've been tasked with. So in order to do so, by lessening that load and bringing on contract scheduler or bringing on an additional administrative support, that is in itself a way of being a better employer. So in the grand scheme of things, if my service and billables on a retainer basis are a fraction of what it would cost to replace a heavy Gulfstream captain, it's a fraction of that. So by doing that, sure, it's like, oh, well, do we really want this additional line in our budget? Do you really want to take the loss on your budget because you had a pilot or two leave in the middle of when you really needed them? There are aircraft management accounts where they are so short-staffed, they've been using contract pilots for months and months and months. I mean, I talked to an aircraft owner a couple of months ago that they got a $75,000 bill for a month worth of contract pilots simply because they couldn't keep people. You're digging your own grave in that case, and the owner was rightfully furious.
Well, the other thing too I see where it's a couple pilots and the owner, right, is somebody leaves and they're like, why would somebody leave this job? Like, they don't work that much. We fly to great places.
It's a great gig.
It's a nice airplane. They get paid well. Like, why would they leave to go to wherever airline. And our friend who's been on the show, Ken, had lunch with a guy that was literally, guy is leaving for Southwest and says, why would he do that? Like, why would he want to go there and fly more? Like, they literally don't see it coming. And then Ken, our buddy who's an airplane broker, explains to him, look, it's this and with the schedule and the pay and the retirement and the benefits and this and that and that. And then he goes, huh, all right, I understand. So what do we do to make sure our other guy doesn't leave? And
you give them the support that they require.
Yeah, a lot of times I think people don't see the train coming until they get run over by it. And then they're like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, they're so disconnected a lot of times because it's just not their business. Aviation is this weird animal that is why we have people like you and I and everybody else, because we know it and the layperson does not.
If you only have one pilot, your plane basically just becomes a train. So
have you been put in this position where it's tough as the pilot sometimes because you have this delicate relationship to balance with the owner where maybe they need help or they need an improvement in quality of life or salary or whatever it is? Are you sometimes the third party that communicates that to an owner? Have you found that or what?
Honestly, infrequently. It has happened, but typically there needs to be enough self-awareness to realize that there's a problem, number one. And number two, be able to figure out exactly what the best use case of someone like me is. And people are recognizing that more and more. They're understanding it more and more. But I'm not necessarily getting involved so much in that side of the house. From time to time, Greg does. But really, there has to be a certain amount of self-actualization to realize that something might be a problem before it gets to that point.
Yeah. And do you find that you're brought in often after there's a departure at a department? Is that a big catalyst for a change?
Yes. Unfortunately, in a perfect world, aircraft leadership would recognize that there's an issue and proceed appropriately from there prior to someone leaving. But yeah, there's certainly been situations where it simply hasn't functioned until someone actually leaves. And at that point, it's too late.
Yeah, and not repeating the mistakes or, doing something different. So keep moving in that direction. So
yeah. And realistically, there's no secret sauce to it. Aircraft management companies lose pilots all the time too. And they may have a great airplane. They may have a great owner. It may be a super solid team. But at the same time, they have to contend with market pressures just like everybody else did. And if that going rate for that pilot is 25, 50K more on the open market, why the hell would you stick around at an aircraft management company? It's a valid argument to make. But bear in mind, especially the way that I look at it, is an aircraft management company is assumed to provide a level of service and a level of support. And when that falls flat, that lands flat on the feet of the pilots typically, because they're the ones that have that front row seat. Like for me, it's easy to just be like, ooh, I don't really like this. I'm going to disappear back to Vancouver. I got to go.
You mentioned earlier your vision of what the future of Part 91 flight departments are. Can you kind of expand upon what you think we'll see in the next 10 years?
As you mentioned, you're right. The redhead stepchild of most aircraft management companies is the Part 91 aircraft. And as a result of that, we're going to see a bigger and bigger progression as charter and fractional expands, that those accounts are pushed to the wayside. Maybe not overtly, but certainly in the eyes of the aircraft owner. The future of Part 91 aviation is shared services. It's bringing in people from all walks of life, stepping away from the Gordon Gekko-esque handshake, wink, and nod kind of situation, and bringing in a diverse set of people that can actually accomplish missions for you. So that independently siloed flight department ultimately becomes a bigger part of the business puzzle for these aircraft owners, simply because it's theirs. It is not being toted on a billboard in Van Nuys as our aircraft, because it's not their aircraft. It is the owner's aircraft. And that individually siloed flight department ultimately becomes a better catalyst for change in the industry. I think that truly agnostic view of bringing in your own set of team of experts is super important. And it's going to be super critical over the next 5-10 years. Now, that said, just because Yonderwest is what it is right now doesn't mean that in 5 or 10 years, we couldn't be a Part 91 aircraft management company. And I say that because I sometimes throw a machete across the room at aircraft management folks. At the same time, like, there is value in it and there is a place for it in the market. It takes up way too much room right now. And there are absolutely aircraft and aircraft owners that are perfectly suited for aircraft management and Part 91 management specifically. They don't want to deal with a headache. They don't want it, like all the arguments that aircraft management makes and ultimately lies about. Being able to be fully functioning and accommodate the needs of a Part 91 aircraft owner is unfortunately falling behind now. But with a resurgence of that, with either independently siloed flight departments or a truly personalized experience for Part 91 management, that's going to go by the wayside. The problem ultimately becomes that right now, if you're diversifying out to the point where you operate an FBO and charter certificate and a Part 91 management division and acquisitions and fuel sales and all the other stuff that you do, it becomes lost. So when people call me up and they're saying, hey, listen, they don't need to introduce themselves. They don't need to say, hey, I'm the captain of this airplane. They don't need to give them the entire fourth degree because we have an intimate knowledge of not only how they operate their airplane, but ultimately how they want to operate their airplane. And that's something that typical aircraft management simply doesn't do. They don't ask because they don't really care. They've already built up their infrastructure. So as a result of that, customer service becomes poorer. And then you have attrition, and then you have operational issues. You have all the stuff that we've discussed. And it kind of just snowballs to the point where it's just not sustainable anymore. And I think we're finally getting to that. And the pandemic is, not to get political or anything, but it's really broadened that divide. When I was originally sitting at my house in California a few years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, I was on a call with one of the big corporate jet groups. And all the management companies were like, oh, I don't know if we're going to survive. Our flying's down 95%. No one wants to go anywhere. People are saying, well, why do I have an airplane? Why am I paying this aircraft management fee for something I'm not using right now? I don't know if we're going to survive. Please. Your business model was a low margin, capital intensive shell game from the beginning. So I don't want to hear any of your complaints because you set yourself up for this set of failures. You know what you could have been doing from operating an aircraft if you didn't need to fly because of the pandemic? Then you just don't fly. You keep everybody in situ and you figure out how to keep the airplane in the hangar and keep it maintained and keep it airworthy. But if you don't need to fly, don't fly. Don't make it the problem of we have a business to support as a result of this airplane. Think of it in the exact opposite manner. Think of it as this airplane supports the business that we already have. And if we don't have a reason to go anywhere, then we're not going to go anywhere. But don't blame the aircraft owner on that because you don't have a business model that can accommodate for catastrophes.
That's an interesting point. I didn't think about it that way.
All right. So I have a question for you. I think a lot of pilots that have never worked with like a dispatcher or scheduler in a corporate flight department maybe don't know exactly what that looks like. Can you kind of explain what that scenario looks like who does what and how the both parties interact?
Sure. So in general, a scheduler from an aviation standpoint is a technical role where you're getting information from maybe a principal or a principal spouse or an executive assistant or wherever that information, wherever that data is coming in from the actual principal itself, we're translating it into a manner that is not only fitting within the confines of an operations manual, the FAA, all the things that you would need to perform a safe operation, but we're translating it into a language that pilots understand. So sometimes, that may look like no one knows what's happening on the other side of that fence. But in reality, we're dealing with a much larger, broader picture because we're not only dealing with what airport are we going to, what time are we getting there, is customs going to be open, all the other intricacies that go through the reptilian mind of pilots when they're looking at a trip for the first time. We've already gone ahead and looked at that and evaluated some stuff so that we're ahead of that game. So from the airline perspective, if you're an airline pilot, you're sharing operational control with your dispatcher. It is the exact same thing. Sure, if a dispatcher at the Southwest Operations Center in Dallas can declare an emergency just as well as the pilot in command can do it. They're sharing operational control. Now, on the corporate side of things, that is typically not the case. However, there's a pretty decent argument to be made that not only are corporate schedulers, should they be certified dispatchers, there's some great schedulers out there that are not certified. But more and more flight departments are recognizing the value of having that additional technical piece in addition to figuring out hotels and rental cars and ground handling and permits and all that other stuff that is an inherent process for every mission. So it can't be overstated enough that there are consistent studies that are showing from the FAA that Part 91 flight departments typically have more risk simply because they're going to non-standard airports. They're doing things in the middle of the night. They're recognizing that having that intricate layer in between the pilots and the principal is super important, because we're looking out for all those different parts of the operation that are not just, siloed in the pointy end of the plane.
Well, there's a couple things that have gone through my mind when you say that. I think people need to understand too, just because somebody's before you are looking at the NOTAMs or the weather or customs times, that doesn't mean that as the pilot, you don't do that.
Oh, absolutely.
At the airline, you get the release that the dispatcher's already created and looked at all that stuff. And what do? You go back through and you look at it and be like, oh, okay, do we have enough gas? And the NOTAMs, I think we've all heard stories of somebody blasting off and then tuning in the AWAS and to the airport is currently closed until February 15th. And people are like, and so things slip through the cracks when you don't have multiple layers and other eyes looking at it. And I think that's where sometimes with the one dude or gal who's gets the trip from the owner and plans the airport and does all this stuff, I mean, obviously there's cracks where things will slip through. So
in the broadest sense of everything, we're still the help, right? I mean, whether you're a pilot, whether you're a maintenance tech, whether you're a chief pilot, you're the help. You're still trying to to bring that mission into fruition and be successful at the end of the day. So the kind of a leadership team approach to it is not only super important, but it also has some very real technical implications, because you're not going to ask me personally to get into the cockpit of Global and fly it. You're just not. But I can get you far enough in advance so that you're more confident to be able to do that mission without having to tear your hair out every single time you get in the plane. It's that additional network and that additional support, and not having to worry about, is there a rental car booked on the other side? Is, where am I staying tonight? All those things that kind of creep into your mind, there's someone else looking out for you. So you can focus on what's truly important.
yeah, that stuff. I just remember my experience. That stuff is so nice. Like you're flying and you're like an hour out and you get a text and it says, from the person that we had that was our scheduler, quote unquote, it says, hey, transportation's in place. I verified it, this. And you're like, oh, sweet. Everything's set. All I got to do is land. That's it.
I would tell everyone that's the ground transportation is like one of the biggest pain points of the whole deal,
Well,
I think.
and especially right now.
Yeah.
Global supply chain aside, it has not gotten easier in any way, shape, or form. I mean, the number of times I've gotten a text message, hey, can we get a rental car when we land? I'm like, aren't you 15 minutes out? If flexibility is truly the key to air power, that conversation can just as easily be, hey, we're staying downtown. Can we just Uber? I'm like, you can Uber. I don't give a damn. Figure it out for your own damn self. You're a professional pilot, damn it.
I just always notice if we're going international across the ocean, we had like a lot more workload. I didn't have time, and I honestly didn't care that much about. It was more like I'll figure it out when we get there, and hopefully, like we got to focus on this, because this, if I screw this up, I could lose my ticket. Where the van's not there, it's not really long-lasting repercussions for me. But which is kind of a selfish way of looking at it. But you only have so much capacity, and you have to prioritize. It is really nice to have that support with all of the details that aren't involved with.
I'll give you an example. This group had me implement an international trip support program for them, where I basically became a project manager, and I interfaced with my contemporaries in international trip support and provided them a packet and monitored their changes and made sure that we weren't losing data, because that tends to be a problem, right? You can tell someone something and then it gets lost in the fuzz, and then all of a sudden it doesn't happen the way you wanted it to. And then all of a sudden it's like, what went wrong? Well, it's because we told someone something, but then we never followed up on it. And if you're doing 20 other things, if you're pre-flighting the airplane and getting fuel and putting catering on and, running around and moving things, then yeah, you might have forgotten to do that. So it's not only just a boon for the professional pilot, it's also a retention program so that they don't have to feel like, oh, well, I'm just being thrown around here and I don't really want to be calling, the international trip provider every 5 minutes when there's a change. I want to have someone to be able to do that for me. And in addition to that, when I go to Singapore, I want to be able to enjoy it and not worry about all the other paperwork I'm going to have to do when I land, because we're one leg into a 5-leg trip bouncing around the continents.
Yeah, I think our operations are so different from A to Z that some require a lot more support. Some are somewhere in the middle. And like the XLS now, we have maintenance management, and then we kind of just handle everything all on our own. And that's totally manageable workload. Where in the Gulfstream deal, just because not only the size of the airplane really wasn't as relevant when we were bouncing around in the country, it's more just the complexity of the owner. Like they were just always bringing more people, had more nonsense going on, where these guys are very simple and see. So it's nice, I think, that there's an option out there that honestly I didn't realize existed till not that long ago, where there's an in between you doing it all or full management. Like needs to be something in between. And it's nice to know that's there.
Well, I mean, that's the first thing we hear about when our colleagues leave for the airlines. It's the first thing they say. Nothing's my problem anymore, you know? And
Yeah,
that's what one of the big...
That's what I always say. That's one of my favorite sayings of the airline. You know what that sounds like? Not my problem.
Yeah, but I think some of that's part of it, like the retention
That's
piece.
it. Yeah, because you just get overwhelmed with dealing with you also hear a lot of people say, I was hired to be a pilot, not all this other stuff. And that's another thing with retention. And I think the first reaction to all airplane owners with retention is to throw money at the problem, right? Or throw money at the pilot. Oh, we'll just give him a raise.
And that's only part of
That's only part of it. One of my reasons I left, or a lot of different reasons, but money wasn't, I don't think, number one. Like I could have gotten the money. Like that was easy. The owner threw a bunch of money at me when I tried to leave. It wasn't about the money necessarily. There's a lot of other things in that decision for retention that I think people that are in charge of making those decisions, like the owner or whoever is charged with that, need to really open their eyes to, as far as benefits, support, all these other things that can be monetized, or vacation. You need to give the pilot, more time where he can do what he wants when he wants to do it, not when the airplane's down for maintenance. That can be monetized too in a contract pilot budget, and things like that. People don't think outside of just increasing the paycheck and people will stay. Because I think in corporate America, that's kind of a thing where you give people raises because they stay, because you can't really change the bounds of the job.
It's a line item on an invoice at the end of the month and nothing more. And frequently they don't even see that.
Right. That's a good point. Now, we should mention too that you kind of are a nomad, right?
Very much so.
Maybe you have a good story about that. Maybe you got a good, crazy aircraft management story. Anything interesting for our listeners?
I think the story that I'm going to tell is relating to aviation and technology. We've seen over the last 10 years the ebbs and flows of technology in aviation. For a while, everybody was big on empty leg apps that you could download. There were 20 different companies that were all doing it. And then 6 months later, they were gone again. And then, because they weren't able to actually create a sustainable business with it. And then, the big thing a couple of years later was scheduling systems. Everybody had their new scheduling system because, FOSS is old. And we want to use something new. And we want to have something that's, everybody has an app. And then you can do all this stuff.
SMS format.
Yes, exactly. But what the biggest topic in technology right now is for the users of business aircraft or charter aircraft is the customer-facing app. And I'm not going to name any names, but there are certainly companies that want to keep all that entire conversation digital, right? You go on the app, you say, I want to go from Scottsdale to Opelika. And then you punch it in and it auto-populates. It runs the numbers because it's all based on an algorithm. It's based on a spreadsheet. And like, okay, we can sell you a trip on a Challenger for X, or we can sell you a trip on a Phenom for X. And they figure it out. But then there's no due diligence in the background, right? Someone says, okay, yeah, that's what I want. Do you know how many times I have seen, because New Mexico comes before Nevada alphabetically in the thing, how many times people have booked a trip
to Las Vegas,
New Mexico, take it off. They've done all the due diligence. The dispatchers have done everything they need. And then they land and they say, where am I?
Didn't Patrick Swayze crash here in like the 90s?
Well, and more than that, it's nobody's fault. It's just the charter companies are typically scared of their clients. They're like, we don't want to give you a pop-up that says, hey, do you mean Las Vegas, Nevada? Because then it's like, well, you're questioning our judgment now? Like, I can go over to the other app, but unfortunately it's the same alphabet. So it's a major issue. But in a good, solid year and a half, I saw that 5 times.
That exact Las Vegas, like where they landed?
Issue. Yep, they fully landed. They went through everything. You could see the direction of the airplane on the moving map, and no one said a damn thing until they landed. And then they said, oh, well, I do have a Hertz car here, but I'm not anywhere close to the Bellagio. This is a problem.
It's a 4-hour. I put it in my phone, and it's like a 4-hour drive to the.
Yeah. And then, of course, half the time it's like, okay, well, we're going to try to sneak in there before dark because, some places you don't want to get in before dark. And all of a sudden it's they're like, oh, well, we're on a duty day, so now you're just stuck.
That happened.
Best of luck to you
It was
guys.
the Best Western up the street. That's you would think if you're the pilot and you're taking off from Teterboro to Las Vegas, New Mexico, it's kind of like when before we departed on a trip where you obviously needed your passport, like we're going to Europe or somewhere. I'd always go, does everybody have their passports? And invariably, I had one time where it's, yeah, we got our passport, and I'm taxiing the runway, and they run up to the front and say, hey, I got my passport, and it's the one that has the holes punched in it. I'm like, dude, why do you put it next to your regular passport? He's like, well, yeah, it's right next to it in the safe.
Neil,
We're going to have to pull off.
We just landed in Vancouver, but we left all of the passports at the hotel in Chicago. What should we do? Taxi really slowly.
Yeah, what happens in that situation?
In that situation, I think the Canadians let them in, even though they were non-U.S. citizens, and they overnighted the passports.
As long as nobody had a DUI, they were good, huh?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, they forwarded the passports, and they brought them back to the customs agents within 24 hours, and they were allowed. And this was, of course, pre-pandemic. The current Canadian border situation is near and dear to my heart.
Literally near. I heard a good tip from a pilot one time who had forgotten his passport. Every time he got to the hotel, he'd put his passport in the hotel room safe, which that's not my technique.
I'm judging you right now.
But that's what he had done. And then they took off and he had left his passport in the safe.
What have you learned?
Yeah. But hey, you want to put your passport in the safe? That's on you. He goes, here's my trick to not forget it now. I take the shoe that I wear with my uniform. I stick the passport in that shoe and I stick the shoe in the safe. You're not leaving.
It works.
Here you guys, it works. So
the customs agents hate him, but that's fine.
Yeah.
The other thing, I always get a passport card, even though I never use it it's like, it's better than nothing. Let's just say that in that instance.
Just depends on which border you're crossing, I think. And what else is in your wallet.
Better than your driver's license.
Yeah.
We'll just say that. But. All right. Well, Neil.
Yeah, really appreciate it. If folks want to get more information from you, Neil, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
So Yonderwest is available 24 hours a day via phone calls, text message, WhatsApp, email. You can visit our website at Yonderwest.aero. We have downloadable PDF. We have a bunch of videos, stuff to kind of get people informed on what the possibility could be. A lot of my marketing is based on the idea that people have to understand what we do before they can actually envision it. So if there's ever any questions, obviously now Dylan and Max, with the flexibility of superior air power, now they know everything. So you can always just email them instead. Right. But in a pinch, you can email me. And that's Neil@Yonderwest.aero. And I spell it right with an IE.
We'll have a link in the show notes for that. We appreciate your time. We look forward to our next dispatching quandary that maybe you can be our dispatching diamond dog.
Oh,
hey, you know what? That is a mission that I am happy to oblige.
Okay. All right.
We might see some exciting developments for Yonderwest in the next 6 months or so. And I hope you guys will consider having me back.
Yeah. In 5 years to see if your prophecy of, the evolution of.
Hey, in 5 years, both of you guys won't be working for me. You'll be working for individually siloed aircraft owners under the Yonderwest banner right there.
Just saying.
All right. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Neil.
You know how it is out here, Mike?
Hey, I was thinking about something. Remember we always go to the hypothetical, like your kid's in high school and he wants to be a pilot, and what do you tell him to do? And that's certainly evolving with all these programs that the airlines are having, right? Now, here's my question. I feel like the college degree thing at this point has kind of gone by the wayside. So if you're going to do one of those programs with Delta or United or Southwest or whoever, do you just go right from high school? Do you even get a college degree? Because all of a sudden flight training becomes a lot more affordable if you don't have to also pay for a 4-year degree. That's your training for your job.
Okay, so this is my philosophy on this. Okay, you graduate high school. Let's say you haven't been flying. You're starting at 0 hours. I would do community college while you're doing your primary flying, wherever you're doing that. Work your way up. If it's going to take you 2 years to get to your CFI, do that. Get your associate's degree out of the way. Then go get hired at an aviation university as an instructor.
Well, no, but that's not. It's a defined
Finish your degree there.
You don't have that option. Whatever program, you get your flight training, you instruct, you go to the partner regional or whatever carrier, then you get your time there, and then you go to the end goal.
Again, I agree with what James said. These programs aren't getting you anywhere that you can't get yourself, is my point. You're increasing your flexibility if you graduate school with no debt, what are they not going to need you for a flight instructor? No, you're still going to need to be a flight instructor. What is the regional not going to hire you if you're not in one of these cadet programs?
No, I think that is easy to say right now. But if things really tighten up and all of a sudden, remember when it's the opposite and airlines and everyone's hiring, but it's like to replace attrition only or whatever, and it's very competitive, then that might be the golden ticket.
It could be, but I think that also brings me to my point of I would still do the associate's degree and then get the bachelor's degree while I'm instructing for free because I want that college degree. Because I think your argument, the college degree isn't required anymore. Well, it's not required right now. But if we get back into the scenario you're saying where they're only hiring for attrition, is the college degree going to be required again? Probably.
I wonder if that's spelled out, though, like in the expectations of those programs. Like this is obviously a planned out career progression.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because I'm looking at like Destination 225.
Yeah.
Apply for the program, complete your first class medical, complete adapt testing, interview for the program, move to Phoenix, meet your Southwest pilot mentor, celebrate your first day of training, first biannual visit to Southwest Airlines in Dallas, receive your CFI rating and start flight instructing, decide on a flight experience pathway, CFI or corporate, start accruing official flight hours, ride in the Southwest jump seat with your mentor, meet Southwest first officer requirements, and formally apply. My point is, there's no college in here. So the guy I'm flying with, his kid is doing that. And I was talking to him and I was like, so you're not going to send him to college? He's like, I don't think so.
I think now with the way college works, you can always get it later.
I think that you and we got a 4-year degree while getting all of our certificates and ratings. Like it's not that hard. Let's be honest. Like there's more room in the day. I mean, that being said, you could also have like a job instead of going to college, but there's time to do other stuff. And I think getting associate's degree, and then if that changes and you need to go to Liberty and bang out the other 2 years real quick online or something.
That's the thing. Online college didn't exist when we were around. Now it's like, I got to go get a degree. I go get one from Western Governors online while I'm as a regional pilot.
I think the wise move probably is what you suggest.
Thank you so much to our listeners for writing in, donating, supporting the show, writing reviews, all that good stuff. We're looking forward to getting those hats out to you. I think you're really going to like them. Check the socials for pictures to see. Thanks to James at Raven Careers. His contact info is in the show notes. And thanks to Neil Everett Capano for coming on and sharing a little bit about what he's up to. All his information will also be in the show notes.
That's it, Dylan.
I think that's about it. Let's do it.
Flexibility.
It's the key to air power.
We'll see you next time.
Rock on.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.